a Bible with you, or if you've got an electronic device that you want to find the text on, we are going to be sharing this morning from the 16th chapter of Luke, the Gospel according to Luke. The first, 13 verses. I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version this morning. If your translation is a little different from mine, that is all right. I'm not going to read to you the entire Greek text. That would be meaningless to most of us, and I would just triple over myself trying to do so. But somewhere in between your translation and mine, the words on your page and the words on mine, there is a word that God will speak to us together. Russ, I am thankful for your flexibility in finding the text this morning. A reading from Luke. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned them and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an account of your management, because you can no longer be my manager.' Well, then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking this position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. And then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth." Friends, hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people. You may be seated. Let the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Based on the study that I've done this week and study in years leading up to this, I want to make a recommendation to y'all. When you sit down to do your own Bible study, and I hope that you do, in fact, take some time to study the Bible, sit down to multiple translations. It can be surprising. It can be eye-opening. Sometimes in the larger shape of the stories, which shifts a bit from translation to translation, but often in the details. And it can bring up questions that you might not have had before. This story, for example, begins by introducing a manager who is accused of squandering a rich man's property. Squandering. How many of y'all who don't teach English have used that word recently? Yeah, it's not a real common one. But does it bring images to mind? Can y'all hear the word squandering and think, that's what that is? I can picture that. You know, it's a word older than the King James. It's real old. It's about wasting something, but it has the flavor of selfishness. It gives the sense that the manager is dissipating a fortune toward his own luxuries, using the proceeds of his master's wealth for his own comfort. Is that kind of how you hear that word? Now that's the New Revised Standard Version. Maybe the translation that you have in front of you is a little different. The Common English Bible says that the household manager was wasting his estate. And that doesn't have quite the same selfish connotation. Eugene Peterson, God rest his soul, tells us about a manager who had been taking advantage of his position by running up huge personal expenses. But of course, the message isn't a translation, it's a paraphrase. But, I got curious, and so I looked at the Greek verb, and you all know by now what kind of nerd that I am. And I discovered diakorpizon. Take that one home and learn it. Diakorpizon. That's a 5-syllable word, like monosyllabic, which means 1 syllable. English is a silly language. What? It's complex. It's a complex language. It is that's for sure. Diakorpizon. Diakorpizon has to do with scattering. Specifically, it has to do with the action used to separate wheat from chaff. You throw the whole mess up in the air, and the heavy wheat falls to the ground, and the chaff blows off in the wind. It's a scattering. Throwing up and hoping for the best. But that word reminded me of another story. And it's one that we skip over between last week's readings and this week's. And so if you still have your text open, you can just look back, and there it is. And it's probably a more familiar one than the one that we're encountering today. It's a story about 3 characters. A son who takes half of his father's inheritance early. The part that he should have gotten when his father passed. He takes it early and he blows it all. It's also a story about the father who blows the budget for a party when that son comes back. And it's also a story about the responsible son who sticks around to maintain the estate. And you all who are familiar with this story, in the end, which character plays the bad guy? Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the responsible son. He gets the bad rap. That's not fair. But the prodigal son, by the way, does the same thing with his inheritance that the manager does with the rich man's wealth. It's the same verb. He scatters it to the wind. Diakorpizon. That's weird. But the story gets weirder. Instead of correcting his behavior, the dishonest manager goes to multiple debtors and rewrites their receipts to buy his way into their good favor. So what happens to the rest of what's owed? Diakorpizon. I didn't waste enough of this earlier. Let's see if I can really blow it. And to ensure that, to ensure his own security and his own comfort, once his boss cans him, he just wastes whatever he has left. People are put in prison for stuff like this. Now, I should note that there is some scholarship suggesting that the manager canceled the part of those debts that he had charged in interest. So what's being returned to its boss isn't necessarily losing value. But y'all, that's an awful lot of interest. It wouldn't be unheard of in the ancient Near Eastern context, and his disciples might not think it's so odd, but it sure does to us. Plus, that's not real clear in the text. So, with a lack of clear anthropological evidence at my fingertips, I'm going to assume that's not what's going on. I just want to put that on the table to say it's worth considering. What it looks an awful lot like is that this manager has squandered his master's stuff twice in big ways. So his master comes back and he says, go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go directly to jail. Right? No, that's not what he says. That's not in the story at all. No, he says, hey, that was pretty clever. Way to go. What? How do we praise that kind of behavior? Y'all, if I take a suggestion like this to the Committee on Finance, I'll get laughed down. There is no way this is even remotely okay. Is Jesus that much smarter than our fiscally conservative Committee on Finance? Well, he probably is. That's a fair call. But I feel like there's something else going on. It kind of makes me wonder if this is even a parable about stewardship. You know, obviously it's a parable about finance. It's a parable about debt and the handling of debt. That's the subject. And it's a parable about stewardship in as much as stewardship is a central theme. But is it a parable offering to us an ethical or a moral model of stewardship? I think a fiscally conservative Committee on Finance would argue that no, of course it's not. But I don't know. I'm not sure I'd be convinced of that. It sure seems like a parable about what we do with our stuff. So just to put ourselves into the parable, let's imagine that we have dishonest wealth. Oh, let's say, for example, that somebody decides to build a casino in our town. Right? The funds from that casino are raised because the house is cheating folks out of money, right? The rule in the casino, no matter where you go, no matter where it is, the rule in the casino is the house always wins. But you know that going in. The house always wins. They're taking advantage of people who have a weakness and often an addiction to gambling. I have a colleague who has a real problem with this. And so every time we go to Lake Junaluska for annual conference or for other meetings, y'all, Cherokee, North Carolina is right down the road. There's a casino right there. That's awfully tempting. They take advantage of people like that. That is dishonest wealth. But let's say that the house decides to assuage the conscience of the community by donating what looks like a large part of their proceeds to local charities. And let's just imagine, and this is where we're getting just into pure projection. No one has approached me about this, but let's just imagine that First United Methodist is one of those charities. What do we do with dishonest wealth? Do we reject it? No, we don't want that. We refuse to take it. Do we bury it? Do we burn it? Those tend to be the default types of answers for sticklers to our book of discipline. We've published this statement in our social principles. Gambling is a menace to society. Those words are in our book of discipline. Gambling is a menace to society, deadly to the best interests of moral, social, economic, and spiritual life, and destructive of good government. As an act of faith and concern, Christians should abstain from gambling and should strive to minister to those victimized by the practice. Where gambling has become addictive, the church will encourage such individuals to receive therapeutic assistance so that the individual's energies may be redirected into positive and constructive ends. The church should promote standards and personal lifestyles that would make unnecessary and undesirable the resort to commercial gambling, including public lotteries, as a recreation, as an escape, or as a means of producing public revenue or funds for support of charities or government. Oh. With a statement like that, how could we possibly support or receive funds earned from any sort of gambling? Some of our more stringent folk don't even like bingo. But y'all, that's not exactly where Jesus lands. Although, to be clear, Jesus doesn't point to the earning of dishonest wealth as a good thing. He's just aware it's out there and suggests how it ought to be used, or suggests that it ought to be used. But how? How would we do that? Given a massive gift, or what looks to us like a massive gift. Maybe our trustees would argue that new air movers would be a really good thing. How many of y'all have been into the education wing in the past few weeks? It's a little toasty back there. We have some issues with our air movers. Or maybe if we brought the carpet back out of the sanctuary, the space would just resonate again when we pipe that organ up. Ooh, how nice would that be if we had the cash for that? Or we could point toward personnel and staffing funding that have diminished over the past decade or two or three. Or, we could look at that number on the back of the bulletin and just plug some funds back into that. But you know what? That's still not what Jesus points to. Make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Golly. It is just all about relationship for Jesus. Everything's about relationship. Everything's about people with this Jesus guy. Yes, sure, there are better models to follow than what the dishonest manager did, but you know what it is? It's a step in the right direction. My mother's favorite singer sings the words, "It's a long way up when you're coming from nowhere." I also wouldn't necessarily suggest following Barry Manilow as a moral and ethical standard, but the dishonest manager is coming from a pretty ugly place. And he's making steps in the right direction. We don't have to get it perfect immediately. Can you imagine how stressful it would be if the moment You decided to follow Jesus. You had to get it right away, and every time after that. Y'all, God made us perfect, not flawless. Make friends. Make relationships. Build relationships. That's what we do with our stuff. We support people. We enhance the connections that we have with them. It might not be perfect the first time, but move in that direction. That is the best possible use of the stuff that we have. Make relationships. Because for our God, who is 3 in 1, everything is about relationship. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.